Good afternoon, everyone. We certainly want to thank you for coming, and we're glad you're here. It's a very special day. It's not very often that we get to have the director of the Institute for Museum and Library Services in Kentucky. Susan happened to be here for a meeting of all the state librarians who met here for the last 3 days. And when I saw that she was going to be here, I thought we definitely need to take advantage of the opportunity and let her speak to the library community in Kentucky. So we're happy that she agreed to take another day of her time to meet with us. And I guess before I forget, I want to thank Ann Hammond and her staff at the Lexington Public Library for hosting us. Appreciate that very much. But first I want to introduce Susan Hildreth. Many of you may know her, or I'm sure you know her by reputation. Susan was appointed by President Obama in what year?
2000. Well, I started in January 2011 was when my 4-year term started.
Okay. But, obviously that's a very important position in library circles. I think she's probably the nation's public librarian is a way to describe it. But the thing I like about Susan is that she started out as a branch librarian. She's been director of some small rural libraries, but she's also been director of some big libraries like San Francisco and Seattle. She's also served as state librarian of California, and as we mentioned in the meeting today, she has the distinction of being appointed to that job by Arnold Schwarzenegger. And she has some stories about that, she says. But Susan has been where we are. So I think she has a very special perspective on what we're doing. She understands us. So that's one reason I wanted to make sure she's here and she can talk to us. So we're very happy to have her with us today. What we're going to do, we're going through a little conversation with her. I'm going to ask some questions, direct some questions to her, to talk about Libraries Day and about our future. And then she's going to talk a little bit about what happens at IMLS, which is very, very important to us. As most of you hopefully know, that's the agency that provides federal funding for our libraries. A key role because you know that so many of the things we do at KDLA is funded with federal funds provided by IMLS. So I want to allow her a little bit of time to talk about what's happening at her agency so that you'll understand that a bit better. And then hopefully we'll have some time that you can ask her questions. You don't get this opportunity very often, so I hope you'll be able to take advantage of that. So, but first I wanted to talk to her, to give her some questions, just to find out what her feelings are about libraries and where we're going in the future. And I thought the first thing I'd like to ask Susan, how did she get into this business? And I think each of us have a story about why we are where we are and how our library journey started. So I'm going to let Susan talk about that just a little bit with you so you help understand her and know her a little better.
Well, thank you, Wayne, and I'm very happy to be here. And I just should really tell you all that Wayne did a fabulous job hosting all of the state librarians. And he took us to one evening to Keeneland, and he also had a gambling expert talking to us about how to wager. That was great. And then he took us to Woodford Reserve, and we learned all about bourbon and how to drink bourbon. So, you know, the library business was out the door, but Wayne showed us a good time. So that was exciting. So how did I get to be a librarian? You know, I'm one of those folks, and there are a few out there, who for many, many years wanted to be a librarian. I mean, I know that's not the case with everybody, but I can remember when I had to do like a junior high school report. What do I want to be? I want to be a librarian. So why did I pick that? When I was young, my family moved around a lot. And they would often move at the end of school, at end of one school year, and I'd have summers without knowing anybody till the next school year started. And the library was a place where I would just go and hang out and read. And really, I mean, that old saying, books were my friend. And I think that was one of the main reasons why I chose this career. Also, I'm of an age range, and a few in the audience are in my age range, not that many, but at the time when I was considering careers, there were limited careers open to women. I mean, it's wonderful that that has changed so dramatically, but teaching, nursing, those didn't, I wasn't particularly interested in that, and so the library science career was a good way to go and would provide me with mobility and a chance to work with people. So I've been very happy and pleased with what I do in my career, because even though I'm at a far removed from the customer, the further removed you get from the customer, the crazier and more bureaucratic it is. But I still know that what I'm able to support with our federal funds in all the state libraries and the local libraries around the country and museums are making a big difference.
You've been around a few years, like many of us, and in the time that we have been in the library, we've seen so many changes. And I know for many of you, we've had this discussion, and the library that we started working in, we would not recognize today. It's so different. And a lot of good changes, and some maybe not so good. But what do you think during your career that the changes that we have seen have contributed positively to what we can do in our libraries?
That is a really good question, and I'd like to hear the audience answer to that as well. But I think, what has really transformed libraries during my career, which began in 1973, was really technology. And I look at technology as a means to an end. And I think we've had such it's been challenging to adapt to technology, and it's always changing, it's continually changing. But I think if we look at it as a means to an end and not an end in itself, we really can realize the great capacity that we have now, because technology gives us such a great opportunity to make all the resources we have more discoverable, more accessible, more able to be given to or bundled to our customers by a theme. So I really believe that people are interested in stories. And if they have a specific subject they want to find out about, they don't really care if they get it. I mean, they may want to have a book on tape or a paperback or a hardback, but they really want to see everything we have about that theme. And they don't have to realize, is it in nonfiction, fiction? Do I have to go to the children's, the young adult? Do I have to go to the special collections? So I think technology really empowers us to share the wonderful content that we have with all of our customers. And it also, where we are now in terms of the ability for our users to help us vet content and create content, I think that's very, very important, and a role that we need to play to take advantage of where technology has, where it's evolved, particularly with social networking. Because although I know some of you or some of your staff out there may be wary of opening up the floodgates for everybody to be talking about their favorite book or creating their own content, this use of technology, I think, is going to help us remain relevant in our communities. So I guess my summary answer to that is technology, which is a challenge, has to be looked at as a positive means to an end. And also, we have to be aware that our technological framework and also our service framework is constantly changing. And if you're not willing to be flexible or interested in those kinds of constant changes and challenges, this may not be the right place for you. But I'm sure all of you are. But I do think that the atmosphere of constant change is really a challenging one that we all, I think, have to be able to try to grapple with.
As we will be facing constant change, what are those factors that you see in the next few years will be impacting the change and will be forcing the change?
Well, that is another good question, Wayne. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those factors as I talk a little bit more about IMLS. But I think that we are, we're at the point where we're at a very strategic point in the history, I think, and evolution of libraries. And I would strongly suggest that we are not at a point where we're saying, should we, do we have to change, or how do we, is it time to change? It is absolutely time to change. The question is, how are we going to change? It's not are we, it's how are we? What direction are we moving in? And particularly when we're dealing with our public libraries in a state that is as diverse as Kentucky, I can't sit here and say, well, you have to do this or you have to do that. IMLS can identify some service trends and themes that you all might want to consider, but you know your communities and you know what's going to work in your communities. But I do think that in the next few years, we're really at a critical point, because as content becomes more and more virtually available, the role of the library in providing content is really changing. And I think many of us are comfortable with that traditional content provision role, but where we have to move is to adding value to that content by curating it, by packaging it so it's more useful for all of our customers and they don't have to go about searching things. They can find areas of interest that they want. I know some libraries look at lifestyle challenges and content and create content. So if you're figuring out how to care for an aging parent, you can go to your library and find out books and find out articles and find out agencies that can help you. So I think we really need to help provide and help anticipate the needs of our customers in this digital world. And I also think the library can provide a great venue for 21st century skills. I'll talk a little bit about that, and engaging our communities in new patterns of learning that we need to really embrace to be successful in the 21st century. So I think this is a great opportunity for us, but we really have to engage and move forward because remaining in the traditional fashion is just, I don't think it's going to work anymore.
You talked a lot about providing content, and I know that for a lot of librarians in our state and around the country, there's a question of ebooks. Something that we've just started to explore how we're going to provide ebooks, and I know that you work on a national level where a lot of the decisions are made that we have to deal with. Mm-hmm. So, what direction do you see ebooks going, and how are they going to work into what the public library does?
Well, I think that is such a challenging topic. Where ebooks are going to evolve. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I have a couple of slides here about ebooks. And I know probably, I hear ebooks and sometimes it just kind of, my eyes glaze over. But I hope that we will reach some kind of an agreement or a recognition by the publishers that libraries really do have value. I think the publishers see the ebook situation as being an either or. Either the publishers, only sell them, or the libraries have them for free for everyone, and that's really not it. It's a both and situation. We know from some of the recent Pew research that people who are readers both buy ebooks and borrow ebooks more than people who are not readers. I think it's all about reading, and I think reading is having a renaissance, and people are really interested in having reading available to them very conveniently. They don't really, they want it available in a lot of different formats. So I hope what eventually will happen sooner rather than later is that through the library, in particular the library catalog. Now, I know that many of us spend time developing great websites with all kinds of, pathways to this and that and all kinds of great stuff, but we know that most people go to the catalog because they're looking for something. And if we know that we have a lot of traffic in those online catalogs, and if in the online catalog we can give our customers, our patrons, as many choices as possible. They want to read about a certain topic or a certain book. Do they want it in paperback? Do they want it in hardcover? Do they want to have a book that's a book on tape? Do they want to have a CD? Do they want to have an ebook? Are they willing to wait on a list for any of those formats? Or would they like to buy an ebook or a print book? I think if we can take advantage of trying to give our user, our customer, a wide variety of choices and letting them at the time make that choice, and even if it includes buying the book, and I know some people may have concerns about that, but it might be an opportunity for the library to get a little bit of revenue, but more importantly, the publishers get revenue, and also some of their mid-list titles that people that may not be getting any kind of traction might get more exposure, because frankly, I think that the publishers will be most interested in dealing with libraries when we can show that we're either going to stabilize or increase their revenue. Because for them it's all about revenue, and I think they're also panicking because of what they saw in the record industry. And that's what I hope we can eventually get to with the ebooks, but we're just in that point where everything is still roiling about, and we're just going to have to kind of hang on there. And there are also some really good examples of what libraries are doing on their own to provide e-content, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my presentation.
Another topic that in Kentucky has been of particular significance in recent years, we've had a lot of political pressure. As you know, we have special taxing districts that have been very important to us for a long, long time. Which are under fire at least, or some are questioning that. And we have other, on both the state level and local level, lots of questions from political leaders and various groups about whether or not we even need a library, how it should be supported. And I think it's new for us to have to defend our libraries and to constantly face this pressure. It seems to be never ending. Mm-hmm. And most of the folks around the state, including myself, we didn't get into this business to deal with that. But we're having to deal with it on a daily basis. So I wondered if you could give us some advice on how to handle that and what we need to be doing with that.
Boy, advice, yeah. Well, first of all, what I would say is, just from the little bit I've talked to Wayne about the special tax districts, though that organizational structure and funding structure for libraries is absolutely fantastic. And I've seen a number of different structures around the country, and structures that include some kind of dedicated tax rate or funding mechanism for libraries. You can be sure that even though it might not feel completely adequate, those library districts have a much firmer future, and at least they can try to manage their revenue because they can project what it's going to be. So even though I can imagine it could be difficult when legislators and other local folks are concerned about that, I would just really encourage you to try to keep that in place. And I think what you've been in your jobs, I'm sure, for a while, so I'm not telling you anything new, but your friends group, your board, your library foundation, I mean, really try to make sure your allies at the local level understand the value of that structure, and how if you want to really retain a vibrant public library system, you need to continue that. I mean, having your system in place with your boards that are really appointed by your existing library boards and not political appointments, that's a wonderful way to keep true civic involvement in an institution that is not supposed to be political. And we're trying to keep our libraries above board everywhere in the U.S., but sometimes it's hard. So, I think we didn't sign up for this, some of us, but I don't think it takes you long when you get into this business till you see it's really all about local and state politics. So, again, if you don't like that, you might want to get out of the way or find somebody, or maybe find a great spokesperson in your mayor or something like that who wants to support you. But I think that it's a very unique structure, and I wish you well in terms of protecting it, because I think it's going to keep your services here in Kentucky valuable and vibrant. So good luck. If there's anything we can do to help from DC, which is probably, you want us as far away as possible, just let us know.
One of the themes of our meetings with the other state librarians this week, of trends across the country, is the notion that we need to be working, looking outwardly. Mm-hmm. So I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about why that's important and how you go about doing it.
When we were talking, when you were asked the question, Wayne, about what do we see for the immediate future, what are our priorities and what's on the horizon, I was thinking that I wanted to mention partnering. So I'm sure all of you have partnerships and are working on partnerships, but are institutions identifying those agencies or entities in our cities or counties or service areas that could be good partners is really critical. And how are we going to identify those partners if we don't look outside of our institution to our community, to our other service providers, and make friends, identify those that have services aligned? One of the things that IMLS has done is we have an existing partnership with the Department of Labor, their Employment and Training Administration in Washington. This is one of our federal partnerships that I think is really working well. And we have, at the federal level, we've provided the ETA, and they manage all the job centers, now known as American Job Centers, throughout the United States. They get their funding from ETA. So ETA is letting all your job centers, or whatever you call them in your various counties, they have different names, but they're letting them know, check with your library, see what your library is doing in workforce development. And we know that all across the country we've been able to develop a lot of good partnerships between the local library and the American Job Center. And oftentimes those job centers are, a Monday through Friday operation at most. So the library gives much broader access to information if they do have night or weekend hours. And we've also found, as you all know probably, that a lot of folks just, going to the job center, going to the unemployment office, it can be a challenging and somewhat demoralizing experience, whereas when you go to the library, it's a very positive place. We treat everyone with respect, and also not everybody knows why you're there. You could be there for a variety of reasons. So partnering, I think, is really, really critical. You can't do that without turning outward. I'm also going to talk a little bit in just a few minutes about civic engagement and what role do libraries play in really bringing different elements or different factions of your community together, using the library as that meeting place and convening center.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a big question now, and I know you're going to cover some of this later, but just before you get into your presentation. Okay, now we have many in the audience who will be here and be in their jobs in 10 or 15 years, and if they're not, they'll be using the library. So if we walk into a library down the road, what's it going to look like?
Wow. That's really, that's, I can see maybe 5 to 8 years. I don't know about 15 years, but what I do think is going to happen, and I would encourage all of you to think about this, even though I know that ebooks don't at this point represent a huge amount of your circulation in some cases, that is going to change. I do believe it's going to change over the next 10 to 15 years. So as that changes, you're not going to need as much physical space for print materials as you do now. And you want to be able to, I would strongly advise you to be proactive in working with your community to identify how do we want to repurpose this great space that is the library. And depending on your community, you might focus on early learning and really turn over a lot of your real estate to either early learning programming or maybe even an agency that does that all the time in your space. I'm going to talk a little bit in this presentation about maker spaces. And maker spaces are really creative areas where people can come and tinker with technology, with wire, with quilting, whatever they want to do, building their 21st century skills. So that kind of a space could very well be part of the library. Even just general places for your community to come, learn together, talk together, further expansion of learning facilities like computer labs. But because so many folks are using mobile technologies, I think the computer labs are ultimately, somehow we're going to get to some smaller or some wireless form of connectivity. But I do think we'll continue to be an entity in our community where no matter what the technological advancement is, there's going to be some people who need some assistance to get there. Others will, go quickly, but there's always going to be a learning skills gap. And I think the library will continue to provide that. So I would say that to me it's moving from more of a book repository, which we're not, I don't mean to be negative about that, but really a much more engaging, enlivened space. And I also think, the other thing I think is we'll all probably have some kind of a print-on-demand device that, either a material is available in your building, maybe through ILL, or it's an ebook, but then I think there still will be a way for you to print on demand material that you want. So we'll see what it looks like. I hope my thought on this whole situation of what it's going to look like in 10 to 15 years is you have to start talking to your community. What would meet their needs and what would they like to see in 15 years? Because I don't want to have a situation happen, which I fear in some cases, where, as ebooks are more prevalent, people think libraries are obsolete, that some people think that already, that some eager Beaver City Council person has some idea for the library, and before you know it, there's some completely different use that's not really serving your community. So, and I shouldn't blame a city council person on that, but somebody will come up with a use, and I want all of us to be proactive and already know what we want to do, chart our own future.
And maybe you just answered my last question, but what can we be doing to get ready for the future?
I think you're doing, you have a great effort here in Kentucky, because this morning I spent a little time with your scholars in your Bridging the Gap program, and I was so impressed with their knowledge and their thinking and how they want to move libraries forward. So I think you're there, you're doing that, but I would just stress, continued community engagement, and you have these library boards in the tax districts. Making sure that they understand the future, what's coming in the future, that they're your real key to the communities. They're the kind of the liaison to your communities, and that they, along with you, are developing plans to move forward effectively for your community. I think the turning outward is really based on, it's not so much what the library can do for the community, but what is the community's vision. And if the biggest problem in the community is kids dropping out of school, how can the library address that situation? So I think we have to really know our communities and try to be in a place where we're making life in our communities better.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to end my questions because I want to give Susan some chance to make a presentation, and then hopefully we'll have some time that you can ask questions.
All right, and so you have a great state librarian. He's a very nice guy. Okay, I don't want to take too long on this, and Wayne might be excused because he already heard some of it over at the state librarians, but I've been talking to a number of different groups this fall, and I thought I would take this opportunity to kind of highlight our world is digital, and how about the first slide there, sir? I have my assistant here, thank you. The world is really become a digital world, and it's critical to be able to handle ourselves in that world is critical for 21st century success. So there are a wide variety of digital initiatives going on, most of them at the federal some of them at the federal level, not all, but I thought I would highlight some of those just so you will know you'll know some of the things that we're working on, and we hope that you are working on in your communities as well. So on the next slide, sir, building digital communities. Now I'm just going to ask for a show of hands, not right or wrong, but has anyone here in the audience heard about the initiative Building Digital Communities? A few. Good. That's great to see. And it's not, hey, that's why I'm here, because I'm going to tell everybody about it. So what is that? It's an IMLS initiative. And let me just, before I launch into this, I know that not everyone here may be totally aware of what the Institute of Museum and Library Services does. You know, we're the federal agency that's responsible for distributing the federal funds to libraries and museums in the United States. Now, probably most of you are most familiar with the funding, which is by far the majority of our funding goes to a program we call Grants to States. And that program provides a population-based allocation to each state, like the state of Kentucky, to provide services through the state library to all the libraries in the state. We also have competitive funds. Those funds are available for museums as well as libraries. So even though you may think, and it's great you get funds through the state library, you also could apply for IMLS funds on your own. And our library programs, it's all available on our website, but the two major programs we have for competitive funding are the Laura Bush 21st Century Grants, which fund all kinds of library education, and that funded the Bridging the Gap program that you have here, and also National Leadership Grants. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those later, but those are really grants when you have a new activity or a partnership that you want to try to move forward. That's the category where you could be funded there. For 2013, our Laura Bush deadline has already passed. The National Leadership Grant deadline is in February. So you can apply directly to IMLS as well as getting funding through your state library. So what is building digital communities? I'm going to try to not to use too many acronyms today, but the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, you might have heard of that, issued the National Broadband Plan in 2010. The goals of that plan are to increase access to broadband, and you have to know that Kentucky is known throughout the country as one of the earliest and best connected states in the nation. Now, this may not be true everywhere now, but I know when I was the state librarian of California, people from Kentucky were brought to California as the leading example in the country. So there you go, remember that. And also the FCC wants to promote digital literacy for all. So we know digital literacy is a very important topic for success in workforce investment, student success. It's really a big focus for IMLS. So IMLS did respond to the broadband plan. We were asked to do something specific. So on the next slide, we'll see what we did. First of all, I think when we talk about digital inclusion, which is what we were working on, that can be challenging to really define that. So I think digital inclusion is making sure your community is connected and can access information. So the FCC had asked IMLS to try to build a framework for helping communities become digitally inclusive. And we did that in working with the University of Washington and a community of over 100 experts helped us produce this framework. And it's available on our website. If the state library can share this PowerPoint with all of you, I'm not going to click to these sites, but I have a lot of clickable sites in this PowerPoint, so you can get to that document if you would like to. So we really wanted to try to provide a vision for a community where digital inclusion is a priority. And we provided information about principles that you might want to consider adhering to and also goals to move forward. We also created another document called Getting Started, which is a condensed action-oriented piece that defines the benefits of digital inclusion and how to start the conversation. So it's a much more, I think, user-friendly approach to all this information. We worked with WebJunction, and I'm assuming most of you folks know about WebJunction, you know, the library training site that is part of OCLC. And we also worked with ICMA, that's the International City County Managers Association. They're a great group because we always want to make sure that our policymakers understand how important library issues are. And TechSoup is a group that provides technical assistance to libraries. And we worked with them, and we took our Getting Started framework and we held 3 summits on that in Bangor, Oklahoma City, and Los Angeles last year. And those results were quite different. The cities were very different, but we had some really engaged folks in each city. So in the next slide, I wanted to just talk a little bit about where we're going with this work. We've continued to partner with WebJunction, and we're beginning to move forward on some work called Our Communities Connected. WebJunction took our Getting Started work and developed a toolkit to move this digital inclusion work forward in your community. Right now we're working with 10 community teams that include the library, an IT person from the city or county, possibly somebody from a nonprofit, possibly somebody from a school district. So 10 communities brought teams together to work on digital inclusion, and these teams are serving as pilots, and we are going to provide technical assistance for them in 2013, and we will have case studies to share with all of you about the successes and challenges for this, what worked and what didn't work, and we anticipate additional pilots in 2014. So we'll get the word out through the state library, but if any of you would really like to enhance or make sure you have the deepest broadband connectivity that you need in your communities, we really are willing to try to help you continue with that work. So in the next slide, I'm going to briefly talk about something called the EDGE. How many folks have heard about the EDGE? A few more, okay. Good. So what is the EDGE? First of all, IMLS is not a partner in this effort, but it really integrates very well with our work on building digital communities. It is a coalition of many different library organizations, and they're setting national benchmarks to define quality public access technology services in libraries. Now, this is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This really focuses on the technology assets in your library, and it would be great work to be undertaken before you launched into serving as the leader in your community for the digital inclusion discussion. So on the next page, I'm just going to briefly talk a little bit about the EDGE. It's, as I said, creating these benchmarks, but they're also trying to demonstrate the value of public access technology to your community so that your leaders, your board, and other funders realize why they want to make sure that the technological state of the library is always as current and strong as it possibly can be. And I just want to make a note on this, on the EDGE. I'm sure many of you have benefited from Gates hardware and software investments. They were great. But I just want to say again out loud that the Gates hardware money is not, it's gone, it's not coming back. I don't think I'm ever going to be up here saying that wasn't true. The hardware money is gone. And I know lots of boards in cities and counties think, oh, those Gates they're going to come and save us again. I don't think they are. They're moving their investments to this kind of activity where they're trying to show and support sustainability of their investment in the community. So. The EDGE on the next slide is going to launch in early 2013. You're going to have the ability to do an assessment, get some feedback. They are currently identifying how they're going to provide training across the country, and you also can provide feedback on the tool yourself. On the next slide, I'm going to talk about, here's another one I want to see. Who has heard about this? ConnectCompete. A couple of people. This is great. So this is really, I'm convinced, just an inside the Beltway thing. And you know, that's where we are. We're inside the Beltway. But I want to talk to you about ConnectCompete. It is a major initiative of, again, the Federal Communications Commission to increase the adoption of broadband. It was launched in the fall of 2011. We know that there are many people, over 100 million in the US, who are not using broadband. Now, there are many reasons why they're not. In some cases, it's just not available. In some cases, they can't afford it. In some cases, they feel it's not relevant to them. But we really would like to increase that level of adoption. So the FCC is working with cable companies, a variety of cable companies who are willing to participate, and they have created a new national nonprofit called ConnectCompete. Now, we recently heard that the FCC has brought Comcast into this family of companies. Comcast has its own offering called Internet Essentials, which you might be familiar with. So we'll see how many cable companies are willing to move forward on this. What is included in the initiative is the ability to get a low-cost computer, get low-cost connectivity, and there's also a big focus on digital literacy. What are we doing in all our libraries? De facto digital literacy core, we're doing it all the time. Right now, these activities are being focused on parents with children in school who have free lunches. So the FCC is really targeting their efforts on parents of young children. We hope at some point we will expand this to other segments of the community, because we know our seniors and other folks also need to have this kind of incentive to adopt broadband. Now, you might not have heard about this if your cable company in your community is not involved. And 23 states have had pilots of this program since the middle of September, but Kentucky was a state where no cable companies were involved in this. So I don't know if that's, I don't know what that says about Kentucky, but you may very well not have heard about it. So why am I talking about it? On the next slide, this is why I'm talking about it. Why do you care about this initiative? The FCC has negotiated a National Advertising Council campaign on digital literacy that will be launching this spring. This is going to be a huge national effort. TV, radio, billboards, print. The advertising agency partner has not yet developed the tagline, but it'll be something like "Got Milk," something like that. I don't know what it's going to be, but this could be, I think that this ad campaign is going to have a huge impact on all of you, no matter whether the cable companies in your state are working with this effort or not, because they're just going to be, splashing out this advertising all over. So we know it's challenging to have an increased demand for services as your resources are decreasing, and the FCC is not bringing any new resources to the table on this. On the other hand, it is a great opportunity, because I think people who may not normally think of using the library will come in to try to find some digital literacy services. IMLS and the American Library Association are working closely with ConnectCompete to try to provide the best context we can to them for working with libraries. And we're also trying to communicate to all of you as much as we know when we know it, so you won't be so surprised in March when you start seeing all these ads about digital literacy and it's available at your library and other computing centers. So something that we are doing is we have supported a development of a zip code locator tool. So what is that tool? That tool will allow someone by their zip code or whatever their community or where they are, by a zip code search to show the libraries or other computer centers in those communities that offer digital literacy training. Now, the zip code tool has yet to be populated, and we will be, I think probably through your state library, we'll be asking you or making you aware that this zip code locator tool is available to be populated. We're trying to make sure that You get the opportunity to review what material's on there. We don't necessarily want to just populate it with libraries that might not have much digital literacy assets at all, but you'll hear more about that. And on the, you may not want to be on there. On the other hand, if you're not in there, if you're there, you could really certainly tell folks what you're doing. Do you have training classes? Do you have any formal training? Do you have one-on-one? Do you have any kind of assets that folks could use? So we'll keep you posted on that through your state library. On the next slide, IMLS is also working with some specific state libraries to help, and that happens to be Illinois, Mississippi, and West Virginia. And we're using them really as partners to identify the digital literacy capacity in those states, but to try to generalize how IMLS or the state libraries could possibly enhance your digital literacy training capacity. So on the next slide, we just wanted to make sure you know that we're working on that. We hope to have some national recommendations. I don't know that we'll have a lot of money for that, but IMLS may be funding pilots to try to identify different ways to enhance digital literacy capacity. And we have 2 archived webinars, if you're interested, that provide a lot of information about this effort. And the archived webinars have been a partnership of ConnectCompete and WebJunction, and they really have a lot of great information. On the next slide, we are also providing or working on providing support to individuals and to libraries. And we're doing that through a grant that we made to the Public Library Association. And there is someone here that has been formerly associated with the Public Library Association, Greta Southard, who, when I was president, I should say, well, I have a boss in the audience. Greta's out there, because Greta was my boss for a while. No, she was my partner. Right, where she was my partner. So anyway, we're always glad to work with PLA. They're a great organization and very flexible and responsive. And so we gave them a grant to work on a project called Digital Literacy Online Resource Collection. So what we're doing with that is our initial focus is finding the best curriculum for self-directed learning that can be used in libraries where no training staff is available. So I know a lot of you folks have very small facilities and maybe you have 1 or 2 people. So at most, we want you to have a couple of software programs that you could at least get somebody on the computer and get them started and they could follow themselves. And I had some really good feedback earlier this morning from your Bridging the Gap scholars that said the earlier they can get that curriculum, the better, so that all of you can get familiar with it. So in case somebody has questions, you could help them. So we are working very hard, very diligently to get that out to everybody. You'll probably see that through messages from us or your state library. And we also are going to be working on the best curriculum being used by librarians or other staff who are providing digital literacy training. So we'll get that out to you as well. So we're trying to do the best we can to provide support there. Okay, I don't want to talk too long. I got a ways to go. So on the next slide, I want to see who has heard about the Digital Public Library of America. Okay, a few. All right, well, you're happy to refer to these slides to get more information. So what is the Digital Public Library of America? It's an exciting new initiative that's focused on providing free access to the huge world of digital materials. On the next slide, a little more information about it. I think it really emerged from the Google Book Digitization Project, and there were all kinds of issues about copyright and access. And out of that, really kind of in reaction to that, the Digital Public Library of America, or DPLA, emerged to try to bring together all the freely available and not with copyright restrictions material that is accessible in all our libraries, archives, and museums around the country. So that's the goal of DPLA. We think it's really going to take advantage of cloud computing. Information is available anywhere at any time. And we're working with some other networks like this that have been established in other countries. But who is this? This is not, on the next slide, it shows that this is not There are federal partners, but it's not a federal effort. It's really a grassroots effort with collaboration of librarians, educators, programmers. Their outreach has been done to many different library organizations. Right now, there are very few paid staff, mostly a volunteer effort. And there are many different stakeholders working collaboratively on this project together. On the next slide, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, but the DPLA is creating code that is completely open source. The DPLA is really going to bring together the metadata that surrounds content collections that are digitized. So it's not necessarily going to be all the content in one place, but it's bringing together the metadata so that metadata is discoverable and can be searched. There are all different kinds of content in DPLA. They are developing right now tools and services to really make this content available, and it's truly a community effort. On the next slide, just briefly, DPLA really kicked off about a year ago and had a launch at the National Archives in Washington. It received $5 million in funding from the Sloan Foundation and the Arcadia Foundation. And that work has really been supporting the meetings of working groups and prototype development. On the next slide, we're really proud that DPLA has received some federal support. The National Archives, the Smithsonian, and the Library of Congress are all very active partners, and the National Endowment for the Humanities and IMLS are funding something called the Regional Digital Hubs Pilot. And that pilot is really, DPLA will partner with existing statewide digital library projects, they're called service hubs, and existing large content repositories, content hubs, to define, test, and implement digital services for the country. So the really great thing about this for you all is Kentucky is one of, and I should know the name of the Kentucky Digital Library, I'm sorry, I don't know, I think it's at UK. The what? Kentucky Virtual Library. Anyway, Kentucky is one of these 7 partners. So I'm sure you're going to hear a lot about this because the concept of the partners is building them up, particularly so some of our small and less resourced libraries that may have very unique materials that they want digitized that would otherwise probably not see the light of day, will be able to have an on-ramp to DPLA. So I think you're going to hear more about that. On the next slide, we hope to have the funding, the private funding really goes till April of 2013, and we hope to be able to scale a prototype for nationwide service here. And I think it may sound like it's pie in the sky, but I think we have the right people together at the right time, and I think ultimately we'll be able to make just a huge amount of information available. I don't think in the long run DPLA is going to be necessarily very visible. I think you'll be able to directly connect to it through your library website, so I think it will only enhance the level of information that your customers can access through your library. So we're really excited about that, and on the next slide, you can always check there for more information, and it's easy to join any kind of a work group or a wiki and find out all about it. On the next slide, I just wanted to, we've talked about e-content a little bit because Wayne had that great question about it. It is so challenging, and we know that activity is going on at the national, state, regional, and local level, and it's so hard really to keep on top of everything that's going on. But at the next slide, I wanted to show that IMLS is working in partnership with OCLC on an activity called the Big Shift. And we helped fund this activity, and I should tell you that we provided $100,000 to do that. Now that might sound like a lot of money. I mean, it's a lot of money, but it's not a huge amount of money. So I don't want you to think that we're just throwing our money all over the place, because practically all our money goes to the grants to states. But we do try to seed some initiative as much as we can. But with this big shift, we want to try to make sure that all Americans continue to have access to this commercially produced content through their local library. And we want to try to really clearly describe the challenges public libraries are facing and identify possible solutions. We're using some public library leaders as an advisory committee, and we want to try to develop specific strategies to ensure this public access to digital content. We will have a report on this, but we're also hoping to have some key action steps moving forward. I just highlighted there a great article that Pat Lazinski from the Columbus Metropolitan Library System did recently on ebook strategy in public libraries. Slow just won't work anymore. I think that's true. And on the next slide, we can see, I wanted to make sure you knew that ALA, the American Library Association, has a digital content and libraries working group. They're focused on this ebook challenge as well. And I think this group has worked with more flexibility and speed than many ALA task forces have. So I'm really encouraged by their work. They're constantly communicating with publishers. They've produced an ebook business model for public libraries. They have a tip sheet on digital rights management, so they are continuing to move forward. I think we are working, our Big Shift group is working closely with ALA, but since ALA is a membership organization, I think sometimes that's a challenge to move as quickly as we might have to move in the future. So I want you to know that many people are trying to figure out the e-content challenge. On the next slide, just to make sure that I think you all know, I'm sure some of you may be aware of what's happening in Douglas County, Colorado. They own their own e-content on a local server, and they're working with a variety of content providers. Another article that Jamie LaRue, the director there, did that was very good. In California, another consortium, the Khalifa Group, is working with Douglas County and the Kansas State Library. They're using a partner, Smashwords, that is an independent author and self-publishing platform. So I think we might want to take this time. It's a timely opportunity to engage with independent authors who are not going through the big six publishers, or individuals in our community who are self-publishing and making their content available and more discoverable. So we know that we will have continued challenges with these publishers, but I said in answering Wayne's questions, I think it's really, it's not an either or both and, it's all about reading and being able to read in whatever format is most convenient for you. And I certainly do hope, at least in my mind, reading in a convenient format is the end game, and I hope that we will get there very soon in the future. So let's move on to the next slide. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some trends and some priorities that IMLS is focusing on. So we've been talking a lot about content, and as I said, I think content is the hallmark of what we do, but in addition to providing content, we have to focus on the library as a key part of the educational ecosystem in your community. And about a year ago, IMLS launched a new strategic plan, and one of our key goals is libraries and museums as places of learning, and making sure that education connection is known as critical for success in the 21st century. I did not bring a lot of these, but I only brought one, but on our website, we have our strategic plan light called Creating a Nation of Learners. And I would really encourage you to just go on there and take a look at it. It's not a huge document to download. It's got some really good information in there and outlines some of our key goals, a little bit more beyond what I'm going to talk about today. So on the next slide, we can see that, you know, when we think about learning, we have I think we are coming to recognize that learning is really not just school time, K through 12 learning. There's a significant amount of our time spent in lifetime out of school learning. And when you look at this chart, you see that only 18% of your life is devoted to studies through high school. So the biggest part of your life is spent in some kind of informal learning situation or opportunity, and that's what the library does. That's our niche. So I think that's exciting information, and our communities are beginning to recognize that, I think. In the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about 21st century skills. And IMLS has made a huge investment in promoting and helping educate our communities about 21st century skills. So I think some of you may remember the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Well, they're kind of out the window now. I mean, they are important, but the 4 C's are what we need to remain competitive in the 21st century. Creativity, collaboration, communication, and critical thinking. When you think about that, the 3 R's really helped us develop content knowledge. Content knowledge is very important, but in the 21st century, content knowledge is continuously changing all the time. So in order to be able to really grasp what's happening to all this change in content, we have to have great critical thinking skills, and that's the focus of 21st century skills. We've developed materials to support 21st century skills for your library staff, as well as to place the library in the center of your community to lead the discussion about your community and how your community is addressing 21st century skills. We have tons of information on our website. We have right there, we have the where you can click to get it, and I would really encourage you to take a look at that. So what else on the next slide are we doing about learning? School readiness and summer reading loss, we've been doing that for years. So on the next slide, I wanted to just share with you a little bit about this campaign for grade level reading and our funding. The funds that we have are available to libraries and museums who provide programming related to the campaign. You don't have to be a member of the campaign, but as I said, the campaign has some key goal areas, and we're interested in you trying to address those goal areas. One of the reasons why we're doing this with early learning is that we're aligning IMLS grant making with a national priority. And we found that in order to try to justify and show the value of what the federal dollars are achieving in Washington, it really helps to align with federal priorities, and early learning is one of them. So this year, in 2012, we awarded $2.5 million in discretionary funds to support early learning projects. This is still a priority for 2013, and there are funds available through our National Leadership Grant category. So that the good news for you is we still have funds available for this for 2013. So I hope you'll consider participating. On the next slide, just briefly wanted to mention that IMLS and the MacArthur Foundation have a great partnership, and here's another example of partnership, to focus on creating learning labs, digital media labs across the country for young people. It's a really great way of them connecting with digital media. Now this is an example where IMLS dedicated $2 million, MacArthur dedicated $2 million. So this pot of money was made available to libraries. We've had a first cohort that was announced last year. In November, we're announcing our second cohort. It's a highly competitive process, so we don't have funds available for that again, but we are going to be creating a community of practice. So if you're interested in learning more about the learning labs, we can get information to you on that. And the other thing I wanted to share with you is that the federal government is very focused on all their grant-making agencies trying to leverage private dollars. So you will see more, I think, partnerships or opportunities where federal dollars are being matched with private or foundation dollars. On the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the maker culture. So I often find that, no, I don't often find, but in some of my audiences, I'd just like to check who has heard about maker spaces. See, this is getting much, that's good. I think it's really starting to, the word's really starting to get around. So, maker spaces are being created in libraries all around the country, and I think the maker space interest has really come out of the do-it-yourself, the DIY culture that has really been developing over the past at least 5 years. So on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about maker spaces. They really support STEM, science, technology, and engineering and math learning. So what are these spaces? They support creativity for all ages by providing basic materials like 3D laser printers, wire, string, fabric, anything you need to make something you need or you want to try to create. As we need less space for printed materials, I think we should make room for the maker spaces, and it's attractive to all ages. Now, I anticipate that in 2014 and 2015, identifying or working on some models or partnerships to support maker spaces will be a funding priority for IMLS, so this is a heads up. This is an area that we hope to support and really model in libraries. We have a few great examples in libraries, but I think it's going to be useful to really try to spread this a little bit more around our country and incent the development of these spaces, because they're so integral to 21st century skills. And it's also a great new space, new opportunity or niche for the library to get into. On the next slide, I'm just going to talk briefly about community. So community is another goal in our IMLS strategic plan, and we're looking in this case at libraries as community anchors. So the community anchor phrase is taken from the broadband world, and sometimes I think it's a phrase that just sounds like if you're an anchor, it sounds like you're weighing things down. You're not building the community. So I don't know how long the community anchor term itself is going to last, but libraries as strong parts of their community, that has been around forever. So I'm going to talk a little bit on the next slide about the potential partnership with village post offices. Has anybody heard anything about libraries and village post offices? Okay, a few. All right. So first of all, I'm just the messenger. I'm not telling you you have to do this. But it's interesting that the United States Post Office, the Postal Service, we know it's being challenged, it's downsizing. They came up with this model called the village post office, where various entities, libraries, community centers, convenience stores, are providing popular services that are most requested in communities where we know their post offices are either diminishing or going away completely. So the USPS contacted IMLS. This is very unusual that a federal agency would contact another federal agency before going out and doing something. But what they had done, they had taken the data that IMLS collects in the public library survey, that's freely available data, and they'd mashed it up with all the post offices that were closing around the country. So they're able to identify communities where they're losing a post office and there is a branch library. So we just made sure that all of you in your state libraries knew that this is something that might happen. Now we're trying to encourage the post office representatives to make sure they find out if the library system has an administrative headquarters and a number of branches, they really need to be working with the administration, not just the specific branch. We're doing the best we can to try to help them understand the world of libraries, but you may have a branch somewhere that gets a call, who knows. But in some of these cases, this means additional revenue for the library. They're providing revenue to provide these services, and it's a great example of a library as a community hub. On the next page, I'm going to talk a little bit about, next slide, libraries and civic engagement. So when we talk about this turning outward concept, to me that really has a lot to do with civic engagement, which is deliberate outreach to give people a voice in their lives. Well, what is this a role for libraries? Why should libraries do this? We are trusted resources. We have deep roots in the community. We have invested in many programs that align with civic engagement, and we are a place where we can convene many, many stakeholders. So I think libraries have been working in the civic engagement field for years, but not particularly strategically. When we think about where is the library going to be in 10 to 15 years, I think we have to think about this role. Is this role one that would work for our community? And if so, we need to have some reallocation of resources so that we can train staff and put some support behind this role of the library as, as a civic convener. On the next slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about something that IMLS is doing. We're supporting two different activities this year on civic engagement. One is a partnership with the Local Initiatives Support Corporation, LISC, which is the largest national low-cost housing provider, we're working with them to do research and lay the groundwork for future investments. We're trying to determine the best practices of libraries and museums serving as the real integrators and the real sparks of creating strong communities, particularly comprehensive community development plans. And we know this is going on across the country, and we really want to identify the early adopters and see if we can create a framework for other libraries and museums who might want to go forward with this. So we also anticipate in 2014 we may be funding pilots of libraries to do this work, and we want to show that libraries can really make a contribution to improving the quality of life in their communities. On the next slide, we're also supporting the American Library Association initiative that's been spearheaded by our current president, Maureen Sullivan, the promise of libraries transforming communities. ALA has partnered with a group called the Harwood Institute, and in fact, Rich Harwood, who is the CEO of the Institute, spoke to the state librarians on Monday. He's a very passionate speaker. He sees libraries as boundary-spanning organizations that are that have a great opportunity, are in a great place to turn outward to their communities. So the first phase of this work this year will be training ALA leadership, also developing curriculum and identifying some pilots, and they hope to find additional funding for a second phase where they will scale this work to a national initiative and would have training modules that could be used all around the country. Probably similar to something you may be familiar with, Turning the Page, so it would be that kind of a training module that could be used all around the country, or even do a train the trainer thing for folks to get that word out. So on the next slide, we have great information about all of our resources. And also, if you do go on our website, you can search our website if you have a specific topic that you want to try to identify. If you're looking for an early learning grant, if you want to try the campaign for grade level reading, you can look at grants that have been funded on topics to see what that grant proposal looks like. So we have we're able to tag a lot of the information on our website. We have a lot of communication devices. We have a blog. We have Twitter. We're tweeting. I'm not tweeting today, but we're often tweeting. And there's a lot of information available on that website. And also on the final slide, there's my email. You're welcome to contact me. And I would really love to take some questions. I know that's an awful lot of information to convey to you, but it does really give you a good idea of what's happening at IMLS and in Washington, and I think in the library field.
Thanks, Susan, for information.
So really, I'd love some questions. I'd love to answer some questions. Wayne had so many good questions for me.
Okay, he's got a question.
Yes, ma'am, way in the back there.
I've been hearing a ton about maker spaces over the last few months, and I wondered if there is a good source of, like a congruence of information about it that you could refer us to.
That is a really good question. When I get back, I will try to get something on our website, but I think it was one of the most recent library journals was all about maker spaces, and the person who, a lot of people know about it, but there's a young woman in Fayetteville, New York, which is outside Syracuse. Her name is Lauren Britton. Even just Google her, and she is doing a lot of the writing on it. And check out the LJ recently, and we'll also try to put some resources up on our website. It's interesting, this makerspace phenomenon, because there are a number of people. Well, let me step back and say, the president has an Office of Science and Technology Policy that advises him on all kinds of science and technology issues. And there are a number of folks who work in that unit who are very, very high on the maker spaces. So I'm not saying anything about what you want to do on November 6th, but from our point of view, we already know that we've made a lot of connections with some of the folks in that area on this topic. So that's not to say we're always going to support the topic, but I do think if the administration doesn't change, I think we're going to have a great opportunity and possibly even money, which is amazing, to try to start to incent these makerspaces in libraries.
For a small community, say 20,000, we have one library, 2 public school systems, getting ready to expand. What would be a couple of the first things you would look forward to do for the future? Makerspaces being one.
Well, but that's one, and you have 2 public schools, and how are their libraries?
Adequate.
Adequate, okay, that's good. Well, I mean, if you're thinking about expanding, that, that's a huge step in the right direction. I think what I would do initially is try to make sure that you have a process to involve the community either in a strategic plan or developing a building program, so you know the kinds of things the community's really interested in, and have them, sometimes it's difficult, it's challenging to get the community to think 20 years ahead of time. Now, they don't know. I mean, we don't know what it's going to look like. How can we expect them to know? But if you can think about some ways to try to figure out where they see the community in 20 years, then that'll help you kind of craft what you want to do with those spaces. But that's really, that can be challenging. And, if you're a community, also thinking about your demographics. If you have a lot of young families, you may very well want to really focus on providing plenty of space and activities for kids. If you're in a retirement community, I would just encourage you to think about what you can do with your boomers, because we know our boomers are, and I'm thinking a lot of people might be retiring to Kentucky. It's so beautiful. The cost of living is pretty good. I know you don't want those northerners probably down. I don't know. But I think it's great down here. But the boomers, they want to, they're not your mother's volunteer. They don't necessarily want to come in and shelve books or anything like that. I think that cohort really wants to be engaged in the library or other civic organizations that they care about. They could be huge assets. If you're doing your building and you have to do a bond campaign or something, you might get boomers to volunteer to run a whole campaign for you. But because they're engaged, they're very engaged individuals in what they do, they want to come in and try to help move the library forward. So I know we had a lot of experience when I was the state librarian in California in working with boomers, and we created some great information. If you can find that if you look and I'm sorry, I can't remember the site. If you go to the California State Library, you can see it. But I really think involving them in shaping your library services, because they're willing to be huge advocates, I think, for libraries. So I think you really have to know your community and try to determine what they're going to want. The other thing I would say is there some other agency that you might want to partner with where you'd have some flexibility? Could you have a community center or some kind of a recreation center that was also part of the library? I know in many communities they have multi-purpose buildings, and yes, there's sometimes hassles in administering those, but also it can be a great opportunity to have flexible space, and the public really likes to see those joint efforts.
Okay, as a longtime librarian and now on a board, I remember when there was a strong relationship with drawing down LSTA dollars. I would go to elected representatives and I would say, well, we need this maintenance of effort on the state level.
Right.
With the budget crunches that have come along, has your agency's policy changed, or is that still a viable message to give to the legislators? Don't cut the state dollars, it's a double cut, you're cutting federal dollars, or have you had to tweak that?
So that's a good question. We have not tweaked that at all. Your state is required to continue to provide it a certain maintenance of effort, state funds, in order to receive federal funds. And that has not changed at all. I would say publicly though that a few states have requested waivers of their maintenance of effort, and there is a provision in our law that allows the director of the agency to grant waivers depending on the conditions. So we have had over the last several years more waiver requests than we've ever had before. And we have to review each one carefully and decide on a case-by-case basis. But no, we do not anticipate changing the requirement for the maintenance of effort, because for many states, it really does make a difference. And the legislators and your budget officials do understand that if they don't keep up their contribution to the state library, they'll lose these federal funds, which are very valuable to them. You know, sometimes when you get into a very large state, your entire budget is so small that they don't even, you know, it doesn't even matter. But I think in Kentucky, what's going on with your LSTA dollars is very valuable. So I think that argument is going to continue to sway officials, and we don't anticipate changing that at all.
Would you want to address cuts that may be coming up in the next?
For IMLS?
Yes.
Yeah. So IMLS, we've had some reductions over the past few years, but we were recommended in 2013 for a status quo budget. Now, I think some of you have heard about the looming fiscal cliff that we think we're all going to run over or fall over or whatever. So what's happened in Washington is that our fiscal year starts in October. So in October 1st was the beginning of the 2013 fiscal year. And Congress, what they did was they adopted something called a continuing resolution. If you ever hear the pundits talk about CRs, that's what a CR is, a continuing resolution that funds the government at the 2012 level through March. So we have 6 months of status quo funding. Now that sounds good, but we have this fiscal cliff looming over our head. So the fiscal cliff has to be adjudicated by January 1st. And the president had to prepare a report to Congress on what would happen if the fiscal cliff which is really, you know, the slang name for sequestration. Remember about a year ago they had a big committee that was supposed to figure out the deficit, and they didn't do it, and they ended up with the sequestration resolution, which was across the board cut to many, many federal agencies. So to make a long story short, if sequestration is invoked, IMLS will be reduced by 8%. Now, I mean, we're going to be able to survive 8%, and that'll probably bring us down to 8%. We won't be able to get above that for a long time, because they're really trying to have a year-over-year reduction of the deficit. So 8% will be a challenge for us, but we'll be able to survive. But you know, since I've been there, we haven't had, you know, we've had continual erosion of our funding. So we don't have a lot of money. $250 million is, in the federal government terms, it's just a little tiny bit of funding. And there's so much we can do with our money that any reduction is really unfortunate, because we have a huge impact and do the best we can with our funds. But hopefully we'll have an 8% reduction. In one of the proposed budgets, the budget proposed by Mr. Ryan, NEA, NEH, and IMLS are all eliminated. So I don't know that Mr. Ryan's budget would become any kind of an adopted budget, but at any time. But there has been concern since I've been in Washington over 2 years, almost 2 years, that, you know, it's a really difficult time. And I think the question is, what is the appropriate role, if any, for federal agencies or federal funding to have in arts, culture, and education? And one of the reasons why I talk so much about education is I think libraries and museums, to some extent, we are about education. We need to have organizations. We're not nice to have. And too often we're seen as discretionary or nice to have. So how do we move the needle to need to have? And that's what I want to try to do. You know, I don't want to be, I don't want to just repeat what I've said before, but, you know, I think that our role, the role of the library in providing open access to information, I mean, theoretically, I would think that this would be of great value to anyone in our community, but particularly folks of this persuasion, And I also think focusing on the role of the library as a place where, you know, where civic engagement occurs. I'm sure that in many cases, some Tea Party folks are maybe using our buildings for meetings. It's really a tough question. I think my advice is to try to determine what is there a value? Is there some kind of value that the library could provide in their point of view? I mean, maybe there's not, but you know, I also think just sitting down and talking with them and making sure they understand all the services we offer. You know, so often I find that folks who are, you know, of around my age, middle age, whatever we want to say, haven't been into a library since they had some bad experience in junior high, or, you know, they all have some story about some cranky librarian. And I think when they are aware of the breadth and depth of resources and services we have to offer, they're really kind of, they don't, you know, they're really unfamiliar with the 21st century library. So I would want to try to make sure that they understood all the services we offered and see if there's anything that we do offer. I mean, I think there might be something that we could connect with them. I mean, look at all we do for e-government. You know, I haven't even talked about e-government, but when you think about how the government, all levels, local, state, and federal, is relying on our computer infrastructure to make this country run, it's amazing. You know, they need some education as well. But, you know, in fact, of course, I guess the Tea Party people probably don't want anybody to be applying for federal assistance, but there's other kinds of things other kinds of benefits and services that people achieve through our computer capacity that I would just want to try to make sure they were aware of. But I know that's tough, and I'm sure that's a challenge in many places.
Well, as was pointed out in Danville last week, Congressman Ryan did apply for federal money.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that, I think if it's there, they do want to apply for it. So
It's a good question. Good online question.
other questions?
We know in public library land, we count everything. And so now with the 21st century libraries, and so much is more usage rather than circulation, do you see all of these reports that we get that we need to fill out changing? Because I think we do so much that we feel like is not counted.
You know, I think that's a really good question, and the IMLS is responsible for the public library survey that we ask you all to complete every year, and we are, I'm really interested in looking at that and trying to make sure that we are counting, or not even counting, we're assessing the services we provide and getting the information that really matters, that will tell a good story. And I think libraries for many years have been accustomed to counting outputs and measuring inputs. And, you know, I think circulation as a broad indicator, just for an example, is I mean, it's great to see. We know circulation has gone up in many places, but, you know, just because it's gone up, how has it changed the life of the individual? So it's just not about how many widgets, it's really what the impact is. And I don't think we have very effective ways of measuring that, and I think we really need to try to move forward on that. I also know we ask about different things in different ways, and that's really challenging. So I think one thing that I'd like to do before I'm done with my term at IMLS is make sure that we're collecting the most relevant data possible. I think it's going to change, but I also think that, sad as it may be, or as frustrating as it may be, particularly in Washington, it's all about impact. How can you show effectiveness and impact? And you've got to be able to somehow collect some evidence that shows that what you're doing is making a difference. So sadly, I don't know that the number of instruments will diminish, but hopefully the questions or what we collect will be very relevant.
Have you ever looked at corporate libraries, I'd be interested in what Google Library looked like, or Cisco or Intel or something like that. Do you know anything about that?
You know, I haven't. I have been at the Google headquarters, and that's quite an experience. But I don't. I would imagine that most of their resources are virtual. They may have a library. I don't know. You know, I think corporate libraries, although they're not eligible for IMLS funds, you know, they really, you know, for many years, even I think earlier than most public libraries, have had to directly understand the nature of the needs of their customers and make sure they're meeting those needs. So, you know, a lot of corporate libraries have really focused on trying to identify what various departments in the business need, and, you know, pushing out packaging proactively information for those business units. So, but I don't, you know, that's interesting. I bet if Google has a library, it's probably a popular reading library, because what Google likes to do is make that venue so comfortable that people are staying there all day long. You know, I mean, they have dry cleaning there, you can get your hair cut there, you can exercise there, they have free food for everybody, they have basketball courts. It's a very, it's a lovely campus, very comfortable, and I would imagine they would like you to stay there and, you know, just do as much as you can. And they also give people specific time during the week, I think, to just work on, not necessarily on a business project that they've been assigned, but all kinds of like free thinking to get their juices flowing. So we'll see. But I'm sure that I still think it's all about reading, no matter what the format is. In fact, I haven't yet had the opportunity to make this suggestion to the person who is, although I may be the public librarian of the U.S., there is a Librarian of Congress, Dr. James Billington, and he's a very distinguished gentleman, and he's the host for the National Book Festival. And some of you may know that every year in Washington we have this National Book Festival, and your state was there. The Center for the Book comes, and we have everybody learn about everything that's going on in the states. But I really would like to change the name of the National Book Festival to the National Reading Festival, because it's all about reading. And there are too many people that I think, sad as it may be, the book gets to be a loaded word sometimes, and it's really just about reading. So, but I don't know that Dr. Billington would take that suggestion very well. So I think I'll wait on that one.
So while I have you here, 2003 we wrote a grant for innovative grant, and IMLS gave us the funds to provide 11 laptops. And so during that time we have been giving free computer classes to the public. And would you be interested in replacing them? They're obsolete.
What I'd say about that is, we still fund some hardware depending on the project, but we would not, honestly, I don't think we would fund replacing your laptops. If you were going to find another partner, or if you were able to take that investment and really kind of build it, or have some kind of new spin on it. Let me just talk a little bit about what happens when you submit a competitive grant to IMLS. We pride ourselves on having 2 levels of review for all our competitive grants. So the grant first goes to what we call a field review, where we send all the grants out, and they're usually read by at least 3 individuals. Just separately, they'll have a slate of grants they read and they evaluate them. Then all those field reviews come back, and our staff assembles them, and we determine what are the most competitive reviews, competitive projects, and those projects then go to a panel review where people read them again, but then they have face-to-face discussions in the panel review. So we have a very thorough review process for our competitive grants, and it's challenging to get through that process. I mean, I know it's a lot of work. And I know some folks are hard-pressed to do that, but we do the best we can to have a very transparent process, And two things, a funny thing happened this week. One of our big supporters in the Senate is Senator Coburn. He likes to be known as Dr. Coburn, but Dr. Coburn from Oklahoma, very conservative gentleman. He is very supportive of IMLS because of our peer review process. He believes that all grant-making agencies should have strong independent peer review, because he thinks, you may very well give grants to your friends or whatever. But the other funny thing that happened this week was every year Dr. Coburn creates this thing called his waste book. And on Monday, he put his waste book out, 100 projects totaling something like $18 million that he thinks are wasteful. And of course, IMLS had a couple in there. We never escape. And one was about a great program in Massachusetts that was done as a part of a tweens to teens reading project that was a Star Wars afternoon. So, and it was Star Wars, so the name was kind of, the name was a little challenging. And it was interesting that we found out after doing some research that really only 365 LSTA dollars were spent in this Star Wars project. And the day that the Star Wars program was on, the library where it happened had the highest circulation they'd ever had. And it was interesting that in researching this, we got down to the library in Massachusetts and told them that their project was going to be in Senator Coburn's waste book. And they were all upset, and they had, and they said, this is a great project, and blah, 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 blah. And they told their Teen Advisory Council about this, and the Teen Advisory Council wanted to write to Senator Coburn and tell him how great the project was. So I think we've kind of defrayed that. But anyway, we also had a project on there about something in museums. So it was interesting that if you go on Senator Dr. Coburn's page, he also put it on Facebook, his waste book on Facebook. But the interesting thing about his waste book, I think, and they had NEH and NEA and the National Science Foundation, a lot of other grant-making agencies. A number of the projects that he called out were gaming projects. And that's challenging because gaming is really the implementation of 21st century skills. And we're not talking about, crazy war video gaming. We're talking about complex development of activities that help kids learn. And it was just telling that a lot of and sometimes the gaming grants sound a little goofy, but when you read about them, it's 21st century skills. So we'll see how that goes. But if you want to have some laughs, you might want to check out Senator Coburn's waste book. It's an annual event.
Time for one more question.
We talk about the necessity of making broadband ubiquitously available. We want to deliver our content over broadband, of course. That's one side. On the other side, people who are using broadband through wireless face data plans being done away with, no more unlimited data, and the wired customers have potential net metering. Mm-hmm. How do we compete against that in the future? Because we know that things like delivering video, some of the really bandwidth intensive and data intensive applications or products are going to come up against that.
Well, I guess that's a very complex situation, and it's going to be challenging to deal with that. I think the work that we continue to do with the FCC and that you may do with some of your visibility in terms of providing broadband, and the work in the National Broadband Plan about providing access to community anchor institutions could ultimately help mitigate some of that. The FCC has called out community anchor institutions, really schools, libraries, hospitals, as the entities where they really want to try to support providing the broadest access to information. And I don't know, I know in talking about the metering and that, I mean, I don't know if we will ever ultimately get exemptions for that for community anchor institutions, but I think that focusing on our unique role as a community anchor institution is the way to do it. Now, I know we had the question about replacing the laptops, and maybe you didn't get the answer you wanted to hear, but I will say that the Gates Foundation, as well as supporting sustainability of its investment, is involved in a number of different coalitions. One is called the Schools, Health, Library, Broadband Coalition. It's called the Shelby Coalition. And it's a group in Washington, D.C. that is constantly monitoring the FCC and other efforts to make sure that those community anchors are at the table and are ensuring that their connectivity is as strong as possible. So, and the Gates Foundation is supporting, helping to support those efforts. So it's something that we really have to monitor, but I think if we can show how valuable our role of community anchor in distributing access to connectivity and the internet is, it may help us mitigate some of those challenges.
I'm sure you can see why we appreciate Susan so much, why we're so pleased that she's in the job that she's in. She has, of course, has responsibilities all across the country, but we're so happy that she's given us a day of her time. We've kept her very busy from very early this morning.
Oh,
so we appreciate her very much. Hope you'll pass along thanks to her.
Thank you.
In appreciation of her visit to us, we thought, well, what in the world could we do?
I'm so excited.
Well,
no, I had a clue. I'm excited.
Yeah, so anyway, we thought, well, what could we do? Well, I don't know. We considered, and we finally decided that the best thing we could do was to make her an honorary Kentuckian. So Governor Beshear has commissioned her as a Kentucky Colonel.
I'm excited. I'm so excited.
So in addition to being Director Hildreth, she can now be Colonel Hildreth.
I like that, Colonel.
Yes,
I'll go back and I'll tell the President. Mr. President, you better call me Colonel.
So thanks to the KDLA staff who helped make this possible technically. So we thank you. Thanks to Ann and her staff. And thanks to each of you for coming. Hope you've benefited from it. And obviously we want to follow up on any information that you've heard that you'd like to hear about more. And it's really an exciting time. As you can see, there's so many things going on, and it's going to be an exciting few years for us. So we appreciate your time coming today, and thank you. Have a safe trip home.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to see you.